So Sydney, go on ahead.
Hi, great. Thank you, Becca. I appreciate it. Just to check, you still see the scoring points, the title slide?
Yes.
Awesome. And if anything comes up, Becca, just feel free to butt in and ask questions. And feel free just to pop on because I can't see you right now. Anyways, all right, great. So hi, my name is Sydney Adams. I am a project officer in EPA Region 3 in the Brownfields program. And I'm here to go over scoring points on climate-focused aspects of your Brownfields grant application. If you have perused the RFA over the past couple of years, you've probably noticed that there's a lot of climate-related language entering the requirements. Today, we're going to go over some important strategies for hitting those requirements because, like climate change, these requirements are probably here to stay and are probably going to develop more in the future. So we're going to go over why we're asking for these requirements later, but I want to emphasize now that we're not asking you to combat, to solve, eliminate climate change impacts on your own. We're just looking to help you make some of the smaller adjustments in your projects that will have big impact on your communities. So before anyone's eyes roll to the back of their head, this is another climate-focused webinar. But we hope that this information specific to the RFA and this year's competition can be helpful to your communities and your application. Because we all know that Region 3 is no stranger to the effects of climate change already. I am based out of Philly, and I, for one, have experienced urban heat, especially walking to work in the middle of July. So I've experienced that. I bet your communities have as well. Perhaps they've experienced excessive heat, especially this very intense last summer that we've had. Or I know for a fact that there are plenty of communities in Region 3 that have had issues with flooding. So be that because you're coastal, maybe you're along the Ohio River, maybe your community exists in a federally designated floodplain, or maybe your infrastructure was built for a 100-year flood, but now we really need to plan for a 200 to 500-year flood. We are no stranger to any of those effects. And so what we're trying to do here is to get people to start using your brownfields to combat these issues on top of the underlying brownfield issues themselves. And you can see that in some of these mock-ups that EPA Brownfields have really been trying to push on people. Google is helping me with metaphors today to encompass taking one action that resolves two, but there aren't anti-animal language. So I'm using two birds, one scone today. And that's what I'm trying to push. So in your projects, we want to see you using brownfields revitalization to support community efforts to become more resilient to climate change. You can do that in many different ways that we'll discuss, or you can read about later, and I'm going to give you the resources to do that. But they can ultimately be categorized into two different types. So that first being adaptation. So methods to prepare and adjust for future climate change effects. Some examples of that are creating improved stormwater systems, planning for increased floodplains, building retrofits, managing contaminants in changing environments, or urban agriculture. In Region 3, I think a great example of this is the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania Paxton Creek Restoration Plan, in which they're preparing Paxton Creek for the increased flooding that they're already experiencing, but for in the future as well in that downtown corridor. The second category is mitigation. So it's less of the proactive and more of the reactive human intervention to reduce human impact on climate change. Some examples of this can be pretty drastic, or they can be really small. So any kind of strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, creating greenhouse gas sinks, sustainable commercial or industrial site uses, greener cleanups, greener roofs. It could be something as small as increasing public transport or putting a bus station on a brownfield site just to decrease greenhouse gas emissions from privately owned vehicles. So it doesn't have to be this grandiose iron air battery making plant. It can be as small as a bus station. And I like to remind people of that. So where should you be looking in the RFA for changes related to climate change? There are specific sections that are specifically looking for climate change and must be included for full points to be earned. But then there are others in which that are not specifically looking for language, but I'm going to try to encourage you to add some additional language. One, to prepare yourself for the future, but also improve your application and set yours apart from others. And I'm hoping that some of these strategies will maybe change your mindset a little bit and say, maybe it is a little bit easier than I can imagine to make my project a little bit more climate resilient. So this first section is 1BII, Outcomes and Benefits of Reuse Strategy. This should be pretty familiar to you all, the first section. That second bullet is describe how the proposed project will improve local climate adaptation and mitigation capacity and resilience to protect residents and community investments. The third is, if applicable, describe how the reuse of the priority site will facilitate renewable energy from wind, solar, or geothermal energy, or will incorporate energy efficiency measures. So we're going to go over a lot of ways that you can fulfill those requirements in the next couple of slides, but I'm going to go over the other sections first. You're going to hear us say a lot about how environmental justice and climate change effects are going to go hand in hand, just like the effects of brownfields with EJ communities. So in section 2A, threats of sensitive populations, applicants are encouraged to use EPA's EJ screen to gain a better understanding of the communities that may be adversely and disproportionately affected by environmental or human health harms or risks. Applicants are also encouraged to use the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. I will also be referring to that as CJUST. And I'm going to encourage you to use both. Take data from both programs. Don't give your reviewer any issues with your application. They're both great resources, and they're going to give you a great opportunity to paint the picture in your community of what are the environmental justice issues and how are we putting that in perspective with climate resiliency and climate effects. CJUST, I don't think we're as familiar with compared to last year with EJ Screen. CJUST is the White House version of EJ Screen. EJ Screen and CJUST complement each other, but EJ Screen provides a tool to screen for potentially disproportionality at the community level, but CJUST defines and maps disadvantaged communities for the purpose of informing how federal agencies guide the benefits for certain programs at your brownfields, such as the Justice 40 initiative. Third section I'm going to point out, it's not necessarily changing, but I'm going to encourage using climate vocabulary here, is 3C, plan to measure and evaluate environmental progress and results. The extent to which the plan and mechanism to track, measure, and evaluate progress in achieving expected project outputs, overall project results, and eventual project outcomes are reasonable, appropriate, and clearly correlate with information previously presented in the narrative. There are a lot of ways that we are tracking climate information now. So be that from acres to your PAQs, these are free opportunities for you to include in your application to make it climate focused or climate resiliency aware and show your reviewer that you are aware of these things. And then this section of other factors and considerations. It's a funny one. This is that table at the beginning where you highlight specific initiatives and interests of the projects that set your application apart from others. This section acts as like the tiebreaker if your application is on the cusp of being funded. So it's really important that you emphasize any initiatives that you really have in your project that can set you apart from others. So the 3 bullets that I highlighted here are going to be easy to fill after looking at this rest of the information as PowerPoint, I hope. And so hopefully we can keep those boxes checked. So the 3 bullets here are whether reuse of the priority sites will facilitate renewable energy from wind, solar, or geothermal energy. whether reuse of the priority site will incorporate energy efficiency measures, and whether the proposed project will improve local climate adaptation, mitigation, capacity, and resilience to protect residents and community investments. So again, why are we asking you to do this in your application? We are not asking you to solve climate change in your project. We're asking you to make the smallest adjustments in your project that will have a big impact on your community. So using brownfield resources to help your community become more climate resilient, utilize resources to promote environmental justice, and then direct communities towards climate-focused redevelopment. And again, this is here to stay, and it's probably going to keep developing. It started back in 2018 with the BUILD Act, when there were the preliminary entities placed on renewable energy and energy efficiency in brownfield redevelopment. So what you actually want to know, how do we meet these requirements? I'm going to go through a couple of strategies, but we're going to take a lot of time on this first one here. So taking language from the EPA Climate Smart Manual. We're also going to go into specifics about pulling out data from CGES and EJ screens, as well as recording climate initiatives in your property approval questionnaires, recording climate focuses in acres, and then I have a whole list of potential sources of leverage resources for you to potentially use in your project, or if so, in your application. As I go through a lot of this, I put a couple of little clouds at the bottom of the slides that are going to say, try in this section of your application. I'm hoping those clouds can kind of guide you to where you can use a lot of this information, because it is going to be overwhelming, and I apologize. There is a lot of information on the next couple of slides, but as Becca said, we hope to make this a reference tool for you while you're writing your application through TAB or through EPA itself. So don't panic. There is a lot of wording, and I apologize. So this first section, the Climate Smart Manual. The Climate Smart Manual is this magical document that was released in 2021, specific to brownfields redevelopment. Each chapter highlights a significant milestone in brownfields redevelopment and gives you many ideas and inspiration to make that action a little more climate resiliency focused. Again, there aren't big project changing factors. These can be very, very minimal with optimal impact. It isn't just about what is on the property at the end of the project, so that big, flashy end site reuse. It's also about how you get there. And that's from everything from starting from your assessments, working your way through your APCA, the cleanup, the demolition, and then, of course, the big, shiny redevelopment. So, of course, going the wrong way. So, of course, you're completing your phase one in compliance with the all appropriate inquiries rule. But you also have a lot of opportunities to dive into the ongoing climate change impacts and considerations into future impacts of your site or area. Preliminary site inspections offer opportunities to look for visual evidence to these effects, drainage issues, proximity to water bodies, etc. You could start thinking about risk factors on the site or the area, using FEMA flood plain maps, looking at precipitation frequency trends in the area, soil types and vulnerabilities, ground and surface drinking water vulnerabilities. It's just kind of adding in those buzzwords into your application and into your phase one assessment, showing the reviewer that you're thinking about these things as you're doing your assessment, so you can have a more sustainable redevelopment cycle. Here are some questions to consider when doing a phase one ESA. So you're looking at historical or projected weather and climate related impacts. What kind of vulnerabilities are evident through your walkthrough? What is the existing water infrastructure, and will it be resilient to climate change? And are there any vulnerabilities in reference to wildfires or flooding risks as climate change increases these predicaments? In the wrong way. Phase two can take this one step further, but now you're involving best management practices into your assessments. So to complete your assessment, you can make your work have less of an impact or footprint on the environment and climate. So using the term BMP, best management practices, some things that you can think about and you can include in your application. Using renewable energy, incorporating remote sensing capabilities, maximizing reuse of existing wells where appropriate and or design wells for future reuse, use field test kits whenever possible, use local laboratories when possible, or use appropriately sized equipment for the project. Again, put the buzzwords in your application. Show the reviewer that you're thinking about these small things and that these small things are climate resiliency focused. ABCAs are required for EPA cleanups and RLF grants. So including climate conscious ABCAs can really help your application. The ABCA provides excellent opportunity for our brownfield communities to evaluate the resilience of remedial options in light of reasonably foreseeable changing climate conditions. I just realized I keep saying ABCA. ABCA is the analysis for brownfield cleanup alternatives. So if you're coming in for a cleanup or multi-purpose grant, it is important to include this assessment of your options in reference to climate resiliency and not just like the economic side of it. If you're coming in for an assessment grant, you can mention that you're going to create ABCAs that are going to include climate resiliency evaluations. And in the end, you may find out that the most sustainable options can also be the cheapest option. So it's just something to ponder when you're drawing up your ABCAs, as well as when you're writing this in your application, say that the ABCAs are going to include this level of evaluation to include climate resiliency considerations. And of course, EPA has a checklist for everything. So here's your little guide for making your ABCA a little bit more climate resiliency focused. The first review and authoritative resource. So you can use USGS, FEMA, state and local resources. We can help you with that to identify observed and potential changing climate conditions for the area in which the cleanup project is located. The second is, given the pertinent climate conditions, identify site-specific risk factors, taking into account known conditions. And then third, include your effectiveness evaluation, how well each alternative can accommodate the identified climate change risk factors. And remember to consider all stages of the cleanup, long-term reuse of the site. That last little piece is going to roll into this idea of greener cleanups. This is my favorite section to talk about climate resiliency in because it's really an area in which you can get really creative, and the smallest changes you make in your cleanup alternative are going to have a huge impact on your community as well as the climate. Within your ABCA, you are weighing cleanup options to be more climate resilient, and how you clean up your site itself can be evaluated for climate resiliency in a number of different variables. Think about greenhouse gas emissions, water reuse, fuel use, waste produced. All of these different variables have a huge impact. And so that's kind of what's really fun about it. So think about the 5 core elements that go into your greener cleanups. So materials and waste, energy, air and atmosphere, water, land, and ecosystems. So you're defining your footprint on the area. For instance, I think if I'm going to think about is water. How are you getting water to your site? Are you trucking it in? Is there a local water source that you're exacerbating? Where is your wastewater going? Is it being trucked out? Is there runoff from the site? Is there infiltration, etc.? There's just a lot to think about just about water on your site and how you're using it. So there's a lot of best management practices in those categories all the way to the right on your slide, I think, to help you reduce your environmental footprint associated with your cleanup activities. Some ideas for you moving forward. So maybe you can include these in your ABCA and or your application are some best management practices. Using biodiesel as a fuel source, using on-site or nearby sources for fill material, native species covers, on-site generated renewable energy, incorporate wetlands, bioswales, other natural resources into cleanup, biodegradable hydraulic fluids, using local staff to minimize resource consumption, using dedicated materials for sampling, et cetera, et cetera. So you can get really creative with where you go with this. And I think it's very important that you add that into your application. Show that you're thinking about this and that you're taking even the smallest measures to make your cleanup more resilient. You can also ponder green demolition, which is basically called deconstruction. It's not a solution for everyone, but it can be a very fascinating and very important way to make your demolition more sustainable, something that you could ponder adding to your application. So deconstruction can be a more targeted, environmentally sustainable method of demolition than typically occurs following a brownfield assessment. So you think about reusing or recycling building materials that can save landfill space, reduce methane emissions from landfills, reduce demands on materials production and transportation, therefore also reducing carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. Again, one small change in your cleanup has a huge tumbleweed effect of how you're influencing your footprint on the area. And then, of course, redevelopment for climate resiliency. There are a plethora of outcomes for your brownfield project, and you're probably sitting here banging your head against the wall saying, I don't know where my brownfield is going after we assess it. I don't know what's going to happen, but something wants to happen. There are a lot of different small outcomes that can come from your redevelopment and planning it now. So you can have a goal of implementing flood risk management on your site. You can have a plan to add green jobs at a site, reduce particulate pollution, reduce greenhouse gases by having energy efficient buildings. They're small things, but include them on your application. Say you have this idea, you want this to become sustainable, you want this to become resilient. Include these buzzwords, include this idea and persuade your reviewer that you are thinking about climate resiliency and all of these different ideas. There are a lot of resources for renewable energy and energy efficiencies in brownfield redevelopment. That little box at the bottom is a link to a fact sheet released by EPA for implementing renewable energy and energy efficiency measures on brownfields. So again, the best time to consider renewable energy and energy efficient technologies is early on your brownfield revitalization planning process. So you can include them on your general reuse plan, your site conceptual design, and you can have a more focused and more useful phase 2 environmental site assessment. And again, include this in your application. I'm just going to keep saying that. It's going to be the theme. There's a lot of information about renewable energy production and a lot of ideas to spit out at you. So again, take your time going through any of this. If some of these ideas jump out at you, talk to your project officer, talk to one of us. We can help you find resources for a lot of this stuff. We can connect you with other people who have also gone through these processes. There is options. So renewable energy production, there's a lot of people who have used their entire site for renewable energy production, but some people who only use partial sites. So a lot of people going for rooftop solar development and maybe a single wind turbine on a site. Definitely multiple options: geothermal power, bioenergy power, wind generation, solar farms, etc. Energy efficiency is the same way. Plan it early. You can use it in part of your cleanup remedy, like I mentioned earlier, but also having an idea of what's going on your site. Can energy efficiency be implemented on the new infrastructure that is going in on the site? So yeah, that's a lot of information from the climate manual, but go in, poach some of those words from the slides, from the manual, and get that in your application. Show that you're thinking about these things and get the reviewer to understand that you're thinking about climate resiliency and that it is part of your plan. Data points from CJUST and EJ Screen. Take data from both pieces, from both tools. Paint the picture of your community sorry, I'm going back on my words here, but paint the picture of your community to the reviewer. If your community has a certain disadvantage, so we are looking for, it is in a flood zone. If that disadvantaged community is in that flood zone, show that you're going to take steps for flood management. Tell that one congruent story. Use CJUST, use EJ Screen tools to paint that picture. In this, I have linked both the CJUST tool and the EJ Screen tool here for you. Use the data throughout your application as well. It's really, really helpful to paint the picture. And again, climate change and environmental justice go hand in hand, so you can tell the story together. There are findings on the disproportionate risk of climate change affecting Black and African American individuals, American Indian and Alaskan Native individuals, Hispanic and Latino individuals, low-income individuals, Asian individuals, and Pacific Islanders. There's a lot of data, a lot of literature on it. You can go into it for days, but use it to paint the picture of your community to your reviewer. Put it in reference with climate change and tell the story together. So this next couple pieces are more so things that you're thinking about once you get your grant, but I believe that you could put these in your application as well to, again, convince your reviewer that you're thinking about this. So in your PAQ, we have an updated section now that you're going to be considering climate adaptation and or mitigation techniques at your site. So we're going to be asking you, is this occurring? You could say yes or no, but add this in section 3C. Say that you're going to be conscious of climate resiliency steps that are taking part in my assessment grant, in my cleanup grant, and I'm going to be recording them in my PAQ. You can also say this about acres. So in the acres update, there is a section in which you are going to check if your project adopts climate conscious building codes, updates to floodplain, coastal wetland, or hazard mitigation plans, climate focused phase 1, phase 2 ESAs, like we talked about, evaluate reuse options that are climate conscious, identify potential risk factors and infrastructure for utility vulnerabilities. In section 3C, say, hey, I am going to record my climate resiliency steps in acres. It's as easy as that. And then the last couple slides here, I'm going to breeze through. Again, they're more of a resource for you. For many of you who have applied for EPA grants in the past, they're often looking for additional leveraged resources to accompany brownfields funding. There is so much out there to incentivize climate resiliency in your project, and be that from renewable energy and energy efficiency projects to risk mitigation infrastructure or just sustainability and community planning. There's a lot out there that you can include in your application or just start pondering for your project moving forward. So that's why I said here, you can possibly add this in section 4A, III. Here are a lot of the federal incentives. I'm not going to go through them all, but they're here for your reference. I'm not 100% sure how all of them work, but I've seen other projects use some of these. A great renewable energy opportunity resource is building a green energy economy guidebook and the federal funding clearinghouse tools. That is linked at the little White House picture at the bottom there. In terms of risk mitigation infrastructure, there are also a lot of resources, and I recommend going to the Green Infrastructure Funding Opportunities webpage on the EPA website. Again, that is linked here on this EPA emblem. Sustainability and community planning. There's a lot of planning grants and technical assistance out there for climate resiliency. I love pushing the federal programs guide. There is a 2023 version now, which is a fantastic resource. If you need a copy, please let me know. Of course, the EPA Climate Smart Brownfields Manual, the Water Infrastructure and Resiliency Finance Center, the EPA Green Infrastructure Funding webpage, and then, of course, EPA Smart Growth Office, who is a great resource, and you've probably been to some of their webinars in the past. And not only at the federal level is there a lot of funding, but there's a lot at your state level as well. Again, these are opportunities that I've observed as well as just looking into them briefly. But there's a lot of examples of projects that have used many different pools of funding to complete their projects. So a big example in Pennsylvania is the Schuylkill Banks Trail and Greenway, who used funding from DOT, the City of Philadelphia, PADEP, Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, and EPA, all in this Schuylkill River Trail project. So it's really awesome what you can do in the frame of climate resiliency projects. Then we have some from Virginia. Norfolk did a lot of work with coastal planning with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. West Virginia, of course, you always have to identify Weir and Steel as now a huge Rust Air battery plant, so big sustainability end use focus. Delaware, focusing on the South Wilmington Wetlands Project, who had an EPA assessment grant to fulfill aspirations of a wetlands park and stormwater management facilities to reduce flooding. Maryland, I love identifying civic works to train people for green jobs. And of course, there is funding in DC. So I know I flew through all the funding opportunities, but they're just places that you can look for additional funding opportunities and plug that into your application. If you take away nothing from this, but there's one thing that's okay, use the language. Show your reviewer that you're thinking about climate resiliency, and it doesn't have to be big. It can be as small as a bus station. It can be as small as you're hiring local employees to do the cleanup. It doesn't have to be big, but you got this. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or emotional outbursts, please reach out. Here's my number and my email. And we do have quite a lot of interest on our team here at EPA about climate resiliency and brownfields. So a lot of really passionate folks about it. So if you ever want to have a conversation about it, please feel free to reach out to Brett or Chris, or even have a phone conversation about it with Joe. Who actually suggested this. So, all right. I think that is all I have. If there's any questions, let me know.